Now we can turn our attention from the buyer side of the market to the seller side of the market through a discussion of supply. This is going to be very similar to our discussion of demand in the last video, so we're going to go fairly quickly. So the quantity supplied is the amount of good that sellers are willing and able to sell. And just like we had a law of demand, we have a law of supply. And what the law of supply is that the quantity supplied is going to be positively related to the price. So as the price increases, the quantity supplied is going to increase, and when the price decreases, the quantity supplied decreases. Just like we had a demand schedule to show the relationship between quantity demanded and price, we have a supply schedule that shows the relationship between quantity supplied and price. With that, we can draw a supply curve. Let's take a look. So on the left-hand side of the screen, again, we have the supply schedule, this relationship between price and quantity supplied. And now we see the law of supply in action. As the price increases, as we move down these columns, we see that the quantity supplied also increases, showing this positive relationship between price and quantity supplied. Just like the demand curve, we could plot these points out. And if we imagine that every possible price and the quantity supplied, we can draw a supply curve. So for instance, one point is at 2020, and we see when the price goes up to 40, the quantity supplied goes to 45. Now when the price goes to 60, we see the quantity supplied is 65. 80 and 80. And finally, when the price is 100, the quantity supplied equals 95. So if we thought of every possible combination of price and quantity supplied, we'd connect all these dots to get the supply curve. So just like the demand curve showed the relationship between quantity demanded and price holding all else constant, the supply curve is going to show the relationship between quantity supplied and price holding all else constant. And again, changes in price are going to be movements along the supply curve, while changes in non-price determinants of supply are going to shift the whole supply curve. So when we say that supply is going down or supply is going up, we're talking about the whole curve shifting. So for instance, an increase in supply is an increase in quantity supplied for each price level. A decrease in supply is a decrease in quantity supplied at each price level. Now, what are these non-price determinants of supply? Well, in this video, we're going to talk about input prices, technology, number of sellers, and expectations as being factors that are going to shift our supply curve around depending on what's happening to them. So the first non-price determinant of supply that we're going to discuss is input prices. Now, input prices are the prices of materials used in the production of the good or service. So for instance, raw materials or wages, because that's the price of labor. A fall in input prices is going to make production more profitable at each price level. So firms are going to be willing to supply larger quantities at each price. So the whole supply curve is going to shift to the right. Conversely, a rise in input prices is going to make production less profitable at each output price. So firms are going to react by be willing to supply less quantity at each particular price. This is going to cause the whole supply curve to shift in. So the second non-price determinant of supply is technology. And technology is going to work just like you'd expect it to. Improvements in technology are going to make it cheaper to produce goods, which means that firms are willing to supply more of the good at each price. So improvements in technology are going to shift the supply curve to the right. If for some crazy reason the technology got worse, that's going to shift the supply curve to the left. Now the last two non-price determinants of supply are going to be number of sellers and expectations. Number of sellers, again, works just like you'd expect. The more firms that enter an industry or enter a market, the greater the quantity supplied at each market price, which means the whole supply curve is going to shift to the right. Now, if firms start leaving a market, the quantity supplied is going to start to go down for each price level, which will shift the supply curve to the left. And finally, expectations. Just like people are forward-looking and buyers are forward-looking when they make purchase decisions, sellers are going to be forward-looking when they make selling decisions. So for instance, maybe a firm thinks there's going to be higher oil prices in the future, so they might want to save some of their reserves to sell later at a higher price. So firms are going to react the same way to expectations as consumers do. So those are the factors that aren't price that are going to affect supply and shift our supply curve around. Next, we can begin to bring the supply curve together with the demand curve to talk about equilibrium.